August 1944. In the mountains of New Guinea, a Japanese corporal named Haruto Sato took out the only photograph of his baby son. The paper was soft from sweat. The face was almost gone. So Sato tore it into 8 narrow strips and swallowed them one by one. Not because he had stopped loving the boy, because if the jungle was going to take his body, he wanted the last proof of his family to disappear inside him first. Sato was 22 years old, a carpenter's apprentice from Shikoku. Before the army, the heaviest thing he had carried was cedar timber. Now he carried an Arisaka rifle, a rusting bayonet, 2 handfuls of rice, and an order that no longer meant anything. Hold the position. That was the order. Not attack, not retreat, not survive. Hold. By the end of the war, tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers across New Guinea, Bougainville, and the nearby island chains would vanish without a proper battlefield ever needing to kill them. They were armed. They were trained. They still had officers. They still saluted. But the strangest thing about their destruction is how little the enemy had to do. The Americans did not need to storm every ridge. They did not need to burn every bunker. They did not need to fight every starving man hidden under the leaves. They cut the sea lanes. They destroyed the airfields. They controlled the coast. Then they waited, and the jungle did the rest. Late in 1943, Japan's military leadership faced a problem it could not solve. Every island lost in the Pacific moved American aircraft closer to the home islands. Every airstrip seized became a runway pointed at Tokyo. Every convoy sunk meant fewer shells, less fuel, less medicine, less time. Inside Imperial headquarters, maps changed faster than men could die on them. Saipan mattered, the Philippines mattered, the home islands mattered most. But the jungle garrisons in the Southwest Pacific? Those could be spent, not rescued, not reinforced in any meaningful way. Spent. To the officers looking at maps in clean rooms, those islands were a living barrier. A screen of exhausted men stretched across mud, mountains, fever swamps, and airless forest. If those soldiers could force the Allies to watch them, contain them, and spend time working around them, then Japan had purchased delay, and delay was becoming the last currency the empire still had. Haruto Sato did not know that. None of the men around him knew it. When his transport reached the New Guinea coast, the men still believed they had been sent to hold a military position. They dug gun pits, they cut firing lanes, they stacked ammunition under tarps. They wrote letters home when paper could be found. For a few weeks, war still looked like war. Officers shouted. Cooks boiled rice, men cleaned rifles they had not fired. The jungle steamed around them like a thing waiting for permission. Then the ships became rare. Then the ships stopped. The first sign was not panic. It was arithmetic. A rice ration that had been measured by the bowl became measured by the pinch. A platoon that once received sacks received a single crate. A medical chest that once held quinine, bandages, iodine, and morphine became a wooden box with labels and nothing behind them. The men counted grains of rice in their palms. They counted bullets. They counted days since the last plane. What they could not count was the number of decisions already made above them. American commanders had learned a brutal lesson in the Pacific. A fortified Japanese position was expensive to take by assault, but an isolated Japanese position was already dying. So they bypassed, they strangled, they let distance become a weapon. No supply ship could move without risk. No barge could hug the coast without being spotted. No aircraft could land on a cratered strip long enough to change the fate of a starving army. The jungle did not have to be conquered. It only had to be sealed. Hunger arrived before the men understood what had happened. Not ordinary hunger, not the ache of a missed meal. This was the kind that changed the shape of the world. Men dreamed about cooked rice so vividly they woke with their mouths moving. They chewed roots until their gums bled. They scraped fungus from logs. They boiled leather straps until the water turned brown and called it soup. One private in Sato's company spent an entire afternoon staring at a dead beetle in his palm. When another soldier asked what he was doing, he said, "I am deciding whether to save it for morning." Malaria followed. The mosquitoes came out of every bomb crater and every leaf cup filled with rainwater. Men shook so hard their rifles rattled against the ground. Fever turned disciplined soldiers into children calling for mothers who were 5,000 miles away. The quinine ran out. Medics broke tablets into halves, then quarters, then scraped powder into canteen caps and stirred it into muddy water so 10 men could receive what should have belonged to one. Dysentery came after that. It did not kill like a bullet. It emptied men. It hollowed them until a uniform could hang from a body as if from a nail. A soldier who had landed at 60 kilos became 40, then 35. The belt holes ran out. The bones did not, and still the officers demanded formation. Morning roll call continued even when men fainted before their names were reached. Rifles were inspected even when the hands holding them were trembling too badly to close around the stock. Sentries were posted on trails no enemy had used for weeks, because discipline was the only object the army could still distribute. Food was gone. Medicine was gone. Hope was rationed down to rumor, but discipline could still be handed out by the hour. The radios became sacred. 2 operators in Sato's sector kept their set under a sheet of canvas and worked on it like priests caring for a shrine. They dried the coils over tiny smokeless fires. They wrapped wiring in scraps of rubber. They turned the dials with hands that shook from fever. Every transmission said the same thing in different forms. Request rice. Request quinine. Request evacuation of the worst cases. Request confirmation of relief convoy. Request instructions. The replies, when they came, sounded like they had been written by men who had never smelled rot. Situation acknowledged. Continue resistance. Maintain present line. Further orders to follow. Further orders did not follow. Then one night, after 6 hours of trying to raise command, the radio gave back only static. The operator listened until dawn. By sunrise, he had removed his headphones and placed them carefully beside the set, as if the dead machine deserved military respect. Silence was worse than bad orders. A bad order meant someone knew you existed. Silence meant you had fallen off the edge of the empire. In Tokyo, the situation was not mysterious. Reports had reached headquarters through fragmentary signals, naval summaries, and air reconnaissance. The language was clean. The meaning was not. Garrison strength declining, disease widespread, supply impossible at present, combat value reduced. Local command instructed to endure. Endure, that word did enormous work. It turned starvation into duty. It turned abandonment into policy. It turned men into a clock Japan could wind with their bodies. Every month they remained alive in the jungle, even useless as soldiers. They still forced Allied commanders to account for them. Every patrol watching a perimeter was a patrol not moving somewhere else. Every map marking a Japanese pocket gave Tokyo a little more time to dig caves, move factories, train civilians, and prepare for the battle it believed would come on Japanese soil. The men in the jungle were no longer being used to win territory. They were being used to slow history down. And because nobody told them that, they kept mistaking their suffering for strategy. By early 1945, the command structure inside the jungle had begun to rot from the inside. Majors vanished on reconnaissance and never returned. Captains died of fever and were buried under roots. Lieutenants tried to command companies that could no longer stand for inspection. In some groups, sergeants made the decisions. In others, the oldest private did. In others, no one commanded at all. Men moved through the trees in small knots, half military unit and half ghost story. But in the sectors where officers still held power, the system became most dangerous. The enemy was outside the perimeter. The punishment was inside it. Allied aircraft dropped surrender leaflets over the jungle, thin paper drifting down through wet leaves, promises of food, medical care, fair treatment, a chance to live. Japanese officers ordered the leaflets burned. Men caught reading them were beaten. Men who hid them were tied to trees. Men who whispered about crossing the lines were called traitors before they had taken a step. The prohibition against surrender had been hammered into them long before the jungle. A captured soldier was not merely defeated. He was erased from honor. His family would carry the stain. His village would hear of it. His parents would bow their heads under shame that outlived the war. That teaching had been built for armies with front lines and supply chains and a path to victory. Here it became a blade turned inward. One night, Sato's platoon woke to shouting near the trail. A 19-year-old recruit had been found with a strip of white cloth hidden inside his shirt. Not a flag yet, not even an attempt, just cloth. The lieutenant made the remaining men stand in the rain while he dragged the recruit into the center of the clearing. The boy said he only wanted to ask the Americans for medicine. The lieutenant struck him hard enough to knock him into the mud. Then he said the sentence every man remembered. The jungle may take your body. Dishonor will take your house. The recruit was not seen again after morning. No one asked. No one could afford the answer. This is the part of the story most official histories struggle to hold. The jungle was killing Japanese soldiers, but Japanese command discipline was deciding how they were allowed to die. Some men were not starving because rescue was impossible every day. They were starving because rescue was no longer worth the fuel. They were dying because evacuation would spend ships needed elsewhere. They were being held in place because their deaths still produced delay. And when they tried to escape that calculation, their own side sometimes enforced it with a rifle. By March 1945, the men no longer looked like soldiers. Their uniforms had turned green-black with mold. Their boots had split open at the seams. Their rifles rusted in patches despite constant cleaning. Their cheeks hollowed. Their eyes became too large for their faces. Yet the habits remained. A starving corporal still saluted a starving sergeant. A feverish sentry still challenged a password in the dark. Men too weak to dig graves still tried to place the dead facing the correct direction. Obedience had survived longer than muscle. That was the terrible achievement of the system. It had built men who could continue serving an order even after the order had stopped serving them. The breakdown, when it came, did not sound like rebellion. It sounded like absence. A man would be present at dusk and gone by dawn. His rifle left neatly against a tree. His mess tin washed and placed upside down on a stone. His boots arranged side by side, toes pointing toward the trail. No speech. No announcement. No final salute. Just an empty place in the line. Some were trying to reach Allied positions. Some were trying to get away from officers. Some were simply walking toward any direction that was not the one they had been ordered to hold. Most never made it. The jungle did not care whether a man was deserting, surrendering, obeying, or praying. It had the same answer for all of them. Mud, fever, leeches, rot, distance. But a few did reach the Allied lines. They came slowly. Not charging, not shouting, not like the enemy American Marines had been trained to expect. They came out of the trees holding rags above their heads, bandage strips, undershirts, pages torn from ruined manuals. One man crawled the last 20 yards and kept pushing a white cloth ahead of him with 2 fingers. When a Marine stepped forward with his rifle raised, the Japanese soldier tried to bow from his knees. He did not have the strength to finish the motion. The medics were not ready for what rescue looked like. The first instinct was food. Give them rice, give them broth, give them anything. Then men began dying after being saved. Their hearts failed, their stomachs cramped, their bodies, starved for months, could not suddenly accept what mercy offered. So the medics learned to feed them in drops, spoon by spoon, sip by sip, as if survival itself had become something too heavy to lift all at once. One Navy corpsman wrote that the prisoners looked less like captured enemies than men, returned from a place outside the map. That was not poetry, it was field observation, because by then, these soldiers had lived under a war that even their own country was no longer willing to name honestly, and the men who survived carried information more dangerous than any rifle. They knew the orders had kept coming after relief had become fiction. They knew officers had punished surrender harder than disease. They knew the Empire had asked them to die slowly while newspapers at home printed words like courage, resistance, and sacred duty. They knew the difference between sacrifice and disposal. That difference is why the survivors became a problem. Not for the Americans, for Japan. In the final months of the war, military authorities still needed millions of civilians and soldiers to believe in the same bargain. Serve loyally. Endure absolutely. Trust that the Emperor and the army would not abandon you. But the jungle survivors were living evidence that the bargain could be broken from above. A man who had watched his friends eat bark under orders to hold a useless ridge did not return with clean faith. A man who had seen a recruit punished for hiding white cloth did not return with simple loyalty. A man who survived by disobeying could not be easily folded back into a system built on obedience. So the state did what states often do with inconvenient witnesses. It processed them quietly. The sick were moved through military hospitals under controlled conditions. The weakest were treated out of sight. The ones strong enough to speak were questioned. Who had they talked to? What had they told the enemy? Which officers had died? Which orders had been received? Who else knew then? When possible, they were reassigned, not honored, not publicly thanked, not brought before families as proof of endurance. Reassigned. Some were marked for units preparing to defend the home islands. The jungle had almost killed them. The Empire still had a use for what was left. Then August came. Hiroshima burned on the 6th. Nagasaki burned on the 9th. On the 15th, the Emperor's voice crossed Japan by radio and told a nation the war was over. But the jungle did not receive broadcasts. In the mountain pockets of New Guinea and Bougainville, radios had died months earlier. Batteries had leaked, wires had rotted. Operators had been buried with hands still stained by grease and fever. The last order many units had ever received was still the only order they trusted. Maintain position. Endure. Australian and American patrols moved toward isolated Japanese groups with interpreters calling into the trees. The war is finished. The Emperor has ordered surrender. You will be treated safely. Lay down your weapons. Some men answered with gunfire. Most answered with nothing. They watched from the leaves and withdrew deeper. Not because they still believed victory was possible. Because surrender being allowed was a fact too large for their training to accept. One patrol found 12 Japanese soldiers standing in a clearing, thin as reeds, armed but not aiming. Listening to the interpreter repeat the announcement. For nearly an hour they did not move. No one fired, no one approached. Then the Japanese soldiers turned, one by one, and walked back into the trees. The war had ended. Their orders had not. Some came out weeks later, a few months later. A handful had to be shown newspapers, photographs, signatures, and live testimony before they believed the Empire had stopped asking them to die. By then the bodies were beyond counting. Some had died in combat. Many more had died of malaria, dysentery, starvation, infected wounds, exposure, and the slow failure of organs that had been asked to outlast reason. The numbers vary by island, unit, and record system, but the pattern does not. In several Southwest Pacific commands, disease and hunger killed more Japanese soldiers than Allied bullets did. In some isolated formations, losses rose so high that the surviving roll calls no longer resembled the units that had landed. Thousands disappeared into categories that sound administrative until you imagine one family reading them. Missing, presumed dead, location unknown, fate unconfirmed. Those words are where governments put men after the jungle has taken the details. Back in Japan, families received cleaner stories. Your son died in service, your husband fell honorably, your father gave his life for the emperor. Battle was an easier word than abandonment. Honor was an easier word than hunger. Sacrifice was an easier word than a meeting in which fuel was judged more valuable than rescue. So the silence hardened. Men who returned often did not speak. Families learned not to ask too directly. Children grew up knowing their father had been in the South and came home with fever dreams, scars, and a terror of wasting food. A bowl of rice left unfinished could make a grown man shake. Rain on leaves could pull him out of sleep. A radio crackle could make him leave the room. But the official story had no place for those reactions because the official story needed soldiers, not witnesses. And the witnesses were the problem. Years later, when researchers began comparing orders, survivor testimony, medical records, and Allied intelligence summaries, the clean story came apart. Not all at once. Paper rarely screams. It accumulates. A message showing command new supply had collapsed. A hospital note describing men returned from jungle sectors at half body weight. A testimony about surrender leaflets being burned. A repatriation form with the word restricted. A family record with no grave attached. One document alone could be dismissed. 100 began to form a shape. The shape was not heroic last stand. It was managed disappearance. A military system had placed men in terrain it could not supply, ordered them to endure after endurance had lost military purpose, punished some for trying to live, and then softened the truth for the families who had already paid the price. That is why Haruto Sato's photograph matters. Not because one photograph can explain a war, because it shows what the official words tried to erase. Before he was a soldier, he was a father. Before he was a number, he was a young man holding a wet piece of paper in a jungle clearing, making one final decision over the last thing in his possession that still belonged to peace. He could not save his body. He could not save his unit. He could not make Tokyo remember him. So he saved the photograph from the jungle by making it part of himself. There are still places in the Southwest Pacific where the ground returns pieces of that war after heavy rain. A rusted helmet under roots, a canteen split by time, a bayonet without a rifle, bones lifted from mud by villagers who were born long after the shooting stopped. The jungle has never been sentimental. It covers everything, but covering is not the same as erasing. Erasure takes policy. It takes clean language. It takes families being told only the version that hurts the institution least. It takes survivors learning that truth can be heavier than silence. The men abandoned in those islands were not saints. They served an empire that inflicted terrible suffering across Asia and the Pacific. Some followed brutal orders. Some enforced them. Some became victims of the same machine they had been trained to obey. That is the hard truth. And hard truth is the only kind worth keeping. Because the lesson of those jungle garrisons is not that war is cruel. Everyone already knows that. The lesson is sharper. Loyalty is not proof that a system deserves it. Those men were loyal past hunger, past fever, past reason, past the moment when any honest commander would have said enough. They held positions that no longer mattered. They saluted officers who could not feed them. They waited for orders from radios that had gone dead. They died believing endurance itself might still mean something. But loyalty is a relationship. It requires two sides. And when one side decides that the other side's death is more useful than its survival, the relationship is already over. The loyal side simply has not been told. The jungle kept their bodies, the files kept the proof.